your thoughts as a whole on the regular season that transpired and what you watched over the last 162 games?
Really magnificent, especially over the last, we'll say, 3 weeks or so. I feel like our group just reached down and went to a different place than they've ever been before, and I feel like we've learned a ton of lessons over the course of the last 4 or 5 seasons, and so many players in that clubhouse have experienced the disappointment that we felt in a number of different seasons, and they didn't let it happen this time. I thought it was just a force of will and a lot of talent, but 162 games, there's always pain, there's always a little bit of a dip and a roller coaster ride, but I thought, by and large, we were fortunate enough to stay mostly healthy, and our pitching at the end started to come together in a way that we're used to it coming together. And, by the end, we were clicking on all cylinders, which is, not super common when you're hitting in every facet of the game, but we did it, and I'm so proud of the guys for what they accomplished.
Jerry, did that make it more special that you guys went out and took the division, and had the strongest of the compared to you?
Without a question. We couldn't have known how it would shake out, but when we left Tampa, I thought we were at a season low, and just the morale around the team, and we still controlled our own destiny. We were still in a playoff position, but it was a point for reflection, and it's tough to reflect when the reward is you get to go face Chris Sale, and we grinded through a tough one that Friday night in Atlanta. And from the next day on, our team showed up, and our swag was there. The self-confidence for 26, 28 guys was through the roof, and the collective belief in one another. They really did lean into playing for one another, and they did what it took. They played every day. They played every inning. Nobody was looking for a moment or a day out. So it was gratifying to see it come together that way.
Was that Saturday in Atlanta, in your mind, maybe the turning point there, the way that kind of played out, and what you guys are able to do from there?
Yeah, I said it the other night, and I believe that's true. It's tough to say there was a turning point in a season where you were actually already in the seat, but we were in a different seat than we were in at the end. And I think the lesson that we all learned was this is what it takes. There's everything that you have to give is required to win divisional championships, to go to the postseason, to achieve buys. You don't get to coast, and I think we didn't do that. And in years past, maybe we allowed ourselves to drift into that from time to time, and this year we just didn't let it happen.
Jerry, if we would have told you though that Logan was going to miss 6 weeks, George was going to miss 6 weeks, Bryce was going to miss 3 months, and you guys were to still win the division, would you have believed us?
Not at all.
I mean, like, that, what does that say to the depth that you guys have in your organization?
I think, first of all, thank goodness for Logan Evans and Emerson Hancock and Brian Wu and The Rock. Through the bulk of the season, those guys really did pick us up when we really needed it. And you don't know how young pitchers who've never really had much experience will show up. But I thought, Logan and Emerson especially were, amazing in what they were able to do and holding it together. Wu turned into an ace and one of the best pitchers in the league. And we kind of knew it was in there, but the world saw it this year. And I just thought Louis' consistency, taking the ball every 5th or 6th day and what he delivered, it allowed us to get to the point in late August when our 5 were back together again, and I think that makes us a powerful threat in October.
Does it feel like your rotation is peaking now at the right time, and you guys kind of have it lined up, obviously with the bye, but the way you want it to?
Yeah, I'll let you know for sure when we see Brian throw against hitters, but he's trending in a good direction. And I think Logan had a really nice September and rose up. You can't be much better than George has been in his last handful of starts with the stuff, laying out the way it has. And from the time we got to Atlanta, when the rest of the team picked it up, I'm not sure that anybody picked it up any more significantly than Louis did. And for everybody to start pitching in and contributing, and I've said this before, for us to go win a World Series, that group is pivotal to what we do. It's so much part of our identity, our personality, to go throw the 6 or 7 innings, to hand the ball to your leverage bullpen and keep managing games the way we have through the years, and I feel like we are situated to do that right now.
Jerry, how is Brian progressing? Will he be one of the pitchers that faces hitters during the season?
You know, I don't know on the latter end, you know, whether he will face hitters or not. I presume he will. But, you know, yesterday the highlight of my day was walking in the training room and he had a smile and said I felt great. So that's good for me. And the trainers weren't particularly concerned. So good deal of optimism that he is part of that rotation to start the ALDS. And he's a huge part of what we do. So pretty important that he's there. But, you know, either way, doing the same thing that we've done for the last month or so, which is just reach down and pick the other guy up. And I think Brian will be there when we need him.
Dan Wilson, his first full season as a manager, you had faith in him last year to take over the reins. What's it like working with Danny? And, you know, tell me a little bit about, you know, how he's guided his ball club throughout the year along with the coaching staff.
You know, Dan never wavers. You know, it's the stress gets to everybody at some point, and you wear it a little bit. His level of patience and belief in the people around him, you know, and it breathes through to every player that he encounters. They know that he trusts them. They know that he believes in them on more than just the baseball player level. And you know, that's a unique thing for a major league manager. He doesn't think about the game first. He thinks about the person first. And I think every one of our players in there appreciates that. And I think it requires a village to win anything, and Dan empowers the village around him in a really positive way.
Yeah, but Jerry, this is a lot different than the wild card the last time. You got 5 days off. How much research, how many people have you talked to about the whole rust versus rest narrative and everything else going into this, and how did it shape your plans?
You know, this one we're fortunate enough. First, I lived through it. You know, in 2014 with the Angels, we had a bye and we didn't manage the rust very well, and we got swept out of the DS by the Royals. And momentum does carry a lot of weight when you're in any short series, for sure. And we're fortunate enough to have Kevin Seitzer and Bobby Magianis, who were with the Braves when they recently had a bye, and gave us some advice on how the Braves handled it, maybe more effectively than my last experience in this situation might have been. And we're going to try to replicate some of the things that they did. You know, I guess introduce a few pieces of our own. We're hopeful to have fans in the stands for inter-squad games during the course of this week. Should be a lot of fun. Put the scoreboard on, keep score, play music, have a PA announcer, try to maintain some level of normal intensity. All the while realizing that, you know, through this weekend, having had the opportunity to get some regulars off their feet, having a couple of days where especially the back end of our bullpen and a few guys that are banged up get a chance to just take a blow, but then turn the volume on in a big way when we get to midweek and not cruise into the weekend thinking that this is a vacation, because it's back on in the biggest way it'll ever be.
Was there anything that they told you that you say, oh yeah, this makes sense, like Kevin or Bobby said, we should definitely do this? I
loved the idea of having fans in the stands. The easiest way to create energy is by leaning into your fan base. It's you know, you can go play hard. Every one of our players is going to play hard. They're all going to do their work. None of them is going to skip a weight room day. That's just not how this group's wired. And I generally think baseball players will go play hard. But the way you create energy is you create energy with fans, with buzz, with noise in the ballpark. And I do think that is going to be a critical piece to what we do. So I hope the people show out. I think they will.
Jerry, what can you say about the kids who helped out along the way? You mentioned Logan Evans. We saw Harry Ford get his first major league start. What can you say about the kids who helped you on this journey?
I was thrilled to see Harry out there for a variety of reasons, but you know, I thought it was a really cool moment for him, especially being that he got to get his first hit off an awesome pitcher and go to first base with his, you know, childhood idol, able to pat him on the head. Pretty cool. Cole Young, Logan Evans, Ben Williamson, so many different young players who've come through our system and contributed to what we're doing, and that's what it takes. You know, we've very much leaned into our player development, I guess, system or our program over these years, and so many of the guys that have contributed to what we've done came through that system, and it's going to be required because the goal is to sustain it, that this isn't, you know, a one and done. We would like this to be a more common event.
Jerry, what are the factors in play over your rotation over the coming days to kind of determine how you slot that out, home versus road, potentially getting Brian some extra rest? Just what are the things that you're you're thinking about it in the next few weeks?
You know, we already have a pretty good idea of what the plan is for Brian. You know, though we're going to wait until he actually sees a real stand on it bullpen or sees a hitter before we make a final determination. You know, and then we have, this is the easy answer. We have a lot of really easy choices, you know, and we can't go wrong with who we pick. But we've had some initial meetings on how we want to line that up. It won't be necessarily geared toward who's your number one starter, but who do we feel is most rested, best positioned, and where does Brian slot in? And we can't really make the other decisions until we have a better idea where Brian will slot.
Well, your best position player side, you know, you're looking at who you want to keep used on your postseason roster. You got some guys, taxi squad you can put on there. How do you want to do that?
You know, we've already had a fair number of discussions regarding that, and versatility is really valuable. You know, the biggest question or debate internally is whether or not we do carry the 3 catchers. Because, you know, through the course of September, one of the benefits of bringing Harry was that, you know, Garv could DH against lefties, and you'd have the ability to pinch hit for him and still maintain a backup catcher in the event of injury, which is a pretty critical thing. We do have some versatile players, guys like Leo Rivas and Miles Mastroboni will be in the mix in the decision. Cole Young can play a number of different positions. We've already got a taxi squad on the way to Seattle, and they're taking a day, but they'll be ready on Tuesday for some work days, and they'll play a part in those scrimmages. And while we haven't made the final decisions on those last spots, the great likelihood is we will go position player heavy because of the nature of a short series and the fact that at some point one of our starters will be repositioned in the bullpen, which we feel like really helps that group back there.
Jerry, we saw the on-field impact that Cal had for you this year, but going back to the contract discussions and everything, the kind of tone, the expectations he set in those discussions about what he wanted moving forward for you guys, how much did that color the success you guys had this year and kind of having him be that beacon of focus for this is the path you wanted to go down and everything?
I think the rest of it has kind of always been there. That wasn't something that just popped up in the spring. He's always, Cal, from the day we drafted him, he's a curious guy. He has hard opinions on how baseball should be played. I think he conveys that, or imparts it on his teammates in a really good way. He doesn't do it vocally. He's not loud. But he's intense. He works hard. He shows up early. He's got your back. I think this year he took maybe a little bit more of a vocal lead, but his commitment to the organization really it has never wavered. And what we went through in the spring was answering the questions: what does it look like moving forward? And I think he was satisfied with the answer. And I would love to have more of those conversations if it results in 60 homer seasons. But he has been so valuable to us. And that predates this season's breakout. He could hit 50 homers next year, and you'd be like, it's anything's possible. And he turned himself into a superstar, and the world got to see it. And he is now maybe one of the faces of Major League Baseball, and that's a remarkable thing to have happened. It wasn't just its impact on the Mariners. I think it was globally on the sport, and his popularity worldwide. When we get off the bus, anywhere we go, it's a frenzy of fans yelling for Cal, and it's fascinating that prior to this he was kind of an under the radar platinum glove winning 35 homer hitting catcher that resided in the Pacific Northwest. Now he's an international star.
Is there one bullet point maybe you would make in his case for MVP? Obviously you have an appreciation for baseball history as much as anyone, but is there one thing maybe that hasn't been discussed enough?
Yeah,
I'd like to put the exclamation point on.
The fact that he's doing it, lining up behind the plate every day is, and he'll take a DH day. It is such a hard position to play. And I've said it this week, my favorite of his statistics this year is his plate appearances. It's when you pop up the league leaders in plate appearances in the American League, and we are a fairly present team in that category anyway. We've got Randy and Julio and JP, guys that play every day. But to have your catcher populate the top 5 in the league in plate appearances, and then to consistently produce. It wasn't like he had some bonkers 20 homer month and then coasted. it was a very steady diet of 10, 12 homers a month, like a metronome. And, what he did, he never really took any time down. A time down for Cal was, coming in a half an hour later, not doing BP on the field. He showed up every day and he brought it.
Jerry, you look at your overall roster and your lineup. How much more prepared for playoff success is it compared to a few years ago? I mean, like the strikeout numbers are way down. It seems like a different look to how you guys would go out and play in the postseason that fits modern postseason baseball.
Yeah, I think our pitching is maybe on par with our pitching in 22. The last time we were there was pretty damn good, and I think our bullpen is maybe more seasoned to deal with what we were dealing with. In 2022, I felt like our bullpen really ran out of gas toward the tail end, and one of the fortunate aspects of this last week or so has been that we've been able to kind of take it a little bit easier on some of those leverage guys and give others some opportunities. And it's also that a number of different guys periodically through the course of the season pitched in bigger moments, none more so than Zardo. Vargas popped in and had some big moments, especially early in the season. Trent Thornton while he was here. So there's been a little bit more of a shared load, but you still have Mooney and Brash and Gabe, and now I think, Zardo in that group that delivers the game to the end. 5 starters who right now are clicking and geared up to give you your 6, maybe more innings on a night in, night out basis. And a lineup that does a lot of different things. In 2022, I thought we were about taking our walk, creating a little bit of chaos, and maybe, a timely homer. Now we have power up and down the lineup. We have speed up and down the lineup. We have on-base presence up and down the lineup. And we didn't have that then. This is a much deeper lineup. I think one of the more, complete lineups, and certainly in the American League. We don't get to see the National League quite as much, but I'm biased. I think it's as deep as anybody's lineup in baseball, and the fact that we can beat you with power, we can beat you with speed, and we can still do the little things. There are a lot of guys in our lineup that are proficient in getting the guy over, figuring out how to get him in, and while this hadn't been a great year for us with hitting with runners in scoring position, I think we hopped over that hump in the last 3 weeks or so and just kind of broke out of it. But we can beat you in a lot of ways, and I think the way you win in the postseason is you pitch, you finish games, and hit the ball out of the ballpark, and we can do those things.
Jerry, you kind of mentioned it there, and this is a very simple question, but why are homers so important in the postseason, and even more so in the regular season?
It's hard in the postseason, like ours. You're facing the best pitching staffs in the league, and it is really hard, to pile up walks. Most of those teams aren't going to walk you as much as we're going to walk our fair bit. We're a disciplined team, just like the Yankees, just like the Red Sox. If you flow down the American League chart, the teams that are most patient in the box wind up standing at the end. But in the postseason, you really don't get the benefit of facing the back-end rotation guy or the middle reliever who's prone to an extra walk every now and then. You're facing the best pitchers in baseball, and it's hard to string together the number of hits required to put up crooked numbers. Crooked numbers happen when you hit it out of the ballpark, and even the best pitchers in baseball give up homers. And we have a great ballpark for our pitchers to pitch in. Home field advantage was pretty important for us, and the fact that we got it is a benefit. And I think that combination of events, the fact that we have power both home and on the road, and that our pitching is geared to pitch longer series here at T-Mobile Park, pretty good things for us.
Jerry, just very quickly about Stan Wilson, you talk about what he's done for the players. What's he meant to you? How has he helped you? How has he influenced you?
He never rattles. He's just Dan. He listens. He's quiet. You can talk to Dan without. Honestly, I could talk to him about the weather today or what we're doing in the 7th inning with a move, and his personality doesn't change. And there's a consistency to him and I said it to him last year in August and September when watching him manage a team without ever having managed before, and just how calm he was. I would like to think that I'm a consistent person. It's like hanging out with somebody who takes it to a different level on just being consistent in who they are, and his patience has taught us all a lesson, and just the game might be in a rush sometimes, but he's not. I learned how to just take it a little bit slower.
Jerry, just Gabe Spire, having him on the roster to go into a postseason compared to the last time, you have a lefty, you have one of the premier lefties in the league in all of baseball. Just to have his presence alone, because you know who you could possibly face. It's got to be a huge difference, doesn't it? Game planning wise.
Huge. Gabe has had an awesome year. Maybe one of the 4 or 5 most valuable relievers in baseball, period. It'd be hard for me to imagine, Aroldis Chapman's having a pretty awesome year, but it's hard for me to imagine anybody feels better about that kind of left-handed presence in their bullpen. My favorite part about Gabe, in addition to the strike throwing, because he hammers the strike zone with real stuff. My favorite part about Gabe is just his personality. He doesn't care who's in the box, and he has no fear. He just goes and attacks the strike zone. He's got some red tush in him, and I think that's a good thing. And I love how he goes about his business. And like I said, with those 3 guys at the back, just the physical stuff, that we can fire out at the end of a game is, it's going to be pretty routine around the league when you look at postseason rosters to see 1 or 2 guys that really have an array of pitches. We've got 3 or 4 of them that right now are about as good as anybody.
Jerry, what's the biggest difference you see in Julio as far as him rounding into kind of a complete ball player this year?
I'll go back to the maturity that he showed when he, what I think is politely declined to go to the All-Star game, because he knew he needed to focus on getting his own game right. And when he did that, it was, I thought it was a big moment for him. He's 24 years old, and I don't think that we all in our community and baseball at large, but especially in our community, I think Julio is regarded as a superstar outside of the Seattle market. And here in our market, we expect so much more out of him, the pressure that we put on him, while he's building a resume that would make most people, gush with praise at his age. But to step back the way he did, and initially it was to go spend time in the cage, spend time with hitting coaches, work on getting the timing right in his swing. But in reality, all it really took was the mental release to say, I'm not right and I need to get right. And then literally that day, he just started raking and has been one of the best players in baseball since then. I think he should win a Gold Glove, and if he doesn't, it's a crime. I think as this season has progressed, Julio went from being an electric, if inconsistent, base runner to being a more intent, thoughtful base runner who can impact the game in a lot of different ways. His power has always been there. Now I think it's manifesting in a way. He's getting the ball airborne a lot more, and I think it's an intentional thing. And second half, Julio has always been pretty awesome, but I do think that what we watched from July to the end of the year was kind of, the last step of him evolving into one of the most complete players in the game. And he does everything. And he's done everything since the day he lined up on a major league field. He's just now doing it consistently, the way the great players do, and he's a great player. And I think what excited me most about Julio and where he is was the other night when we are celebrating our clinching victory on the field, and everybody's pouring champagne, having fun, interacting with the crowd. Julio, if you had a chance to see him, was just staring up at all the, it's a sellout crowd. Everybody's going bananas, and he was just calmly soaking it all in. And I think that's where he's been. He's learned how to take it to a calm that he's never had before. And I think that level of in the zone, however they get there, he's in that zone, and I hope he stays there for another month, or maybe 15 years. So.
Jerry, what have you learned about Josh since he's got here that you didn't know before the deal was made that's kind of propelled you guys?
I knew he was a really good offensive player. I knew he had a very high baseball IQ, and I would have presumed that he was physically and mentally tough. But whatever you thought on your level of confidence on a scale of 1 to 10, is your confidence in any of those things like a 7? Now it's like an 11. He is one of the physically toughest players. He's played through some real bang up nicks and more than nick and bruises the last month. And never really took a step back. He found a way to contribute. His lack of fear on a baseball field is remarkable. I think that's what makes him an awesome base runner. He's probably not going to win foot races with many guys even among our team, but he's as good a base runner as anybody we have because he's not afraid to be. He has great baseball sense, and love having him on our team. Feel like he has been he was a boost. The day he showed up, I think the other then 25 guys were really uplifted by the fact that this was a real all-star level player who was in the middle of having a good year, who has been to postseasons, who could come in here and give us a little bit of an edge that I'm not entirely sure we've ever really had before. We've had awesome guys who work hard, who are intense. Josh brings like an edge, a fire to him that's just a little bit different than most guys in the league. And I love having him on our team.